So Bonnie and April fixed whatever was wrong with me, or at least I think, 'cause I'm not seeing anything different. I sure hope they weren't lying to me and did unseemly things with me without me being there to experience it, but still. Anyways, on to the movies. Gene Summers, an American Air Force pilot, is recruited for a secret mission that takes him to German-occupied France in order to assassinate a lawyer and suspected spy and traitor in the French resistance. There's a lot of training and a lot of manly talks about honor and duty, and then he goes to France and realizes that blindly killing a man isn't all that easy as previously thought. Orders to Kill is a fairly simple movie about orders versus ethics and how even the most clear-cut mission can be misconstrued. Whether or not he received the correct orders is something you will have to witness for yourself, but you can rest assured that the movie will not bore you while waiting for the conclusion. It's a very simple movie in comparison to modern movies, but that should be expected for a movie from 1958. It's a gentle movie with a moral dilemma and a maybe or maybe not open ending. Don't expect too much, so keep this movie if you want to have a little off time with a tea or a coffee under a blanket but don't want to see a sappy rom-com. Check that. Death Kiss is a continuation, of sorts, of the popular and well-known Death Wish movies from the 70s and 80s, with none other than the icon Charles Bronson, about a man seeking vengeance against the scum of the earth that harmed him and his loved ones. Unfortunately, Charles Bronson died in 2003, but to many people's surprise he has a very uncanny doppelganger walking around. Enter Robert Bronzy, a Hungarian actor and professional horseman, who looks almost identical to Charles Bronson in his prime. Seeing him in the movie makes this film quite special. It's as if Charles Bronson himself is playing him, and this without special effects. The movie itself is simple. The character from the Death Wish series continues his murder spree against all kinds of scum and villains, starting with child molesters and drug dealers, but there are plenty of baddies that get the end of his extremely large gun. There's a subplot about a woman with a wheelchair child that gets its reveal in the later moments of the movie, and that's about it. Bronzy doesn't talk much, but he talks enough without ruining the illusion that he is not Bronson. The movie could have been better, but it's such a delight to see that it's almost like a continuation. For fans of Death Wish and Charles Bronson, definitely check this out. People who don't know Bronson should see the originals first, because the quality of this movie isn't up to par enough to convince a new viewer to check out the classics. I loved it for what it was, though. Check that. In the far future, one of the last bastions of humanity is besieged by a bunch of cyborgs trying to end us normal humans. The leaders of this city decide to send a team back into the past to save humanity. And where else to send this team, consisting of a manly man played by Tom Burlinson and a smart cookie played by none other than Carrie Fisher, then to the Australian outback in the 80s. Within this desert land out where the river broke, the bloodwood and the desert oak, Holden wrecks and boiling diesels, steam in 45 degrees, they will need to find a key that will destroy the robotic genocidal maniacs that wish to kill everyone. Unfortunately, the Aussies don't like outsiders and things are a bit more difficult than expected. Who would have known, right? Australia in the 80s seemed even more unfriendly than Australia now, so what were they thinking? Luckily we have charming Nikki Goghill who brightens the screen in this fairly dull movie with a fairly nonsensical plot. This movie is Australian B-movie to the T, and it bombs spectacularly. Watch this only out of curiosity. Check that. A group of 4 Russian geologists, 3 men and a woman amongst which a couple, are digging for something in the Siberian wastelands for country and for glory. They're a happy bunch of friends and strike it rich. Unfortunately, a large forest fire surrounds them and their group and precious cargo has to fight to reach safety from the barren cold wastelands through the burning fires and beyond. The survivors will try to reach safety and contact others for help. But will they make it? You will have to watch this very Russian movie to find out, of course, and for people who don't watch a lot of of communist movies that can be a daunting task. The movie is split up between a fairly boring and almost surreal half where they are looking for whatever it is they'll find and a half where they have to survive. It's hard to explain in words, but it often feels like the visuals are like a shadow theater, where the actors are almost visible on a kind of 2D plane. It's effective with the fire surrounding them, but it's weird in a good way. The first half didn't interest me much, but the second one was compelling. You'll be witness to a scene that, in retrospect, feels very Russian, but it makes sense. Even for a person who was raised in a moderate climate, I would never have survived, that's for sure. Letter Never Sent is an interesting movie and part of classic cinema. I wouldn't call it a must-see, but any real film aficionado should definitely give this a watch. Smash That. A movie with dreamy Tom Hiddleston and kinda dreamy Tilda Swinton as ancient vampires in a modern society, and they get naked? Hell yes. So yes, Tom Hiddleston plays Adam, an ancient vampire living in the almost empty Detroit. He's a musical genius and the muse of many musicians of yore. He's a bit sad. He wants to die because eternal life is such a drag, right? In comes Eve, played by Tilda, who flies back from Tangier to Detroit to reunite with her lover. They reunite, have sex, and talk about all those people they met. They don't name drop though, no, they just reference it, somehow making this movie feel like a great member fest for the immortal. Hey, remember this? That happened. Hey, remember that guy? We did that. Remember it? Remember? Eventually Ava pops up, who I think should have been named Lilith, but who am I, right? You got to Adam and Eve and then they decide on Ava. Sure, whatever. Anyways, she pops up and causes some trouble. Stuff happens. The movie happens. Only Lovers Left Alive is a Jim Jarmusch movie, so for those who know a little about him, you should know what you're getting into. He's one of those directors that has a distinct style that clearly doesn't fit in anything per se. It is an interesting plot with interesting people. The member berry shit is enjoyable for a while, but the usage of music in this film is quite awesome. I went on the net to find the soundtrack after seeing this movie. Seeing it was so good. As for the movie itself, it's fine for what it is. You'll watch it and enjoy it, and it'll flee from your mind as soon as it's over. Check that. Two hitmen have a job to kill a man in a school of the blind. Much to their surprise, however, the man doesn't run, doesn't fight, he just lets them kill him. Surprised by what just occurred, these two men tried to find out what made this man do what he did. What follows is a story about a race car driver getting involved with a dame who, of course, has a sugar daddy played by none other than Ronald Reagan, who is on the wrong side of the law. The Killers is a neo-noir crime adaptation of a movie with the same name from 1946, which in its turn was an adaptation of a short story by a 1927 story by Ernest Hemingway. It features Lee Marvin as the veteran hitman who just oozes cool next to the much younger, much less experienced John Cassavetes' character, who tries to compensate for overacting his badassness. The heartthrob of the flick is Angie Dickinson, who plays pretty much a femme fatale next to the man who would become president after this movie. The Killers is a classic. I wouldn't call it a must-see, but it's entertaining enough to give it a look-see. Smash that. Mark of Cain is a British Gulf War drama of a couple of British troops in Iraq who at one point decide to restrain suspected insurgents and, due to rising tensions, decide to torture them. It deals with a couple of soldiers coming back home and not dealing with that situation in a very good manner. Either psychological or informational, things get out. The media gets hold and stuff happens. Mark of Cain, of course, is a drama depicting what pushes men to do such things and how they, in ways, can force others to participate under the notion of group pressure. What makes this movie interesting is the no-nonsense look at the proceedings. There's no action, no extreme drama, things just happen the way you figured they would. The cast is fine and the movie is well made, but this is not a blockbuster, of course. It's interesting to see, even though the depictions of the torture, tame as it's filmed, is a bit hard to watch. I'm not sure if they'll ever do a movie about Abu Ghraib, but this is probably the closest you'll get. Check that. The Private Life of Henry VIII. You know, that horn dog that was portrayed by a way too handsome man in the epic series The Tudors, is a movie about the private life of Henry VIII. Private as in mostly looking at him dealing with all of his wives, not specifically what private things he does with those wives. Even though that would have been a wee bit more interesting, we could not expect that to happen in a movie made in 1933. Yes, this is a very old movie, predating World War II. So expect a very slow movie without action and a lot of bombastic acting. You might think this is a bad thing, but the movie is quite enjoyable for its age. You get a little bit of a history lesson, and all the women are typically acting like dames, talking both giggly and wet about the fat Henry VIII played by Charles Lawton. Overall, this movie is good for a classic, but be sure to go in knowing that it's a movie showing its age. Check that. From Hell to the Wild West is another movie with Charles Bronson lookalike Robert Bronzy, and it once again puts you in a Western movie with the iconic actor played by a lookalike. The movie, however, is pretty bad, as we follow Bronzy hunting down a serial killer that is later to be revealed as Jack the Ripper in some unnecessary scenes that take place in our time. The second, however, you see the killer kill prostitutes, you pretty much know that they are alluding him to be Jack the Ripper. The prostitutes are all awful actresses, and even the occasional nudity isn't interesting enough to keep you invested. What baffles even more is the decision to have the killer wear a mask out of, probably, a consortium of human skin and cloth. Having this makes the viewer expect horror and maybe even a gore fest, but even that doesn't happen. In short, the movie fails to be a Western. The locations are clearly touristic towns. It fails to be a horror, fails as an action, and fails as a sexy thriller about a man luring prostitutes to their death. From Hell to the Wild West could have been interesting, but it's not. The only novelty, once again, is Robert Bronzy, but maybe that's because I like Charles Bronson enough. You tell me. Drop that. In Kindred, a reclusive boy who enjoys spending his time with all kinds of audio trinkets and Foley work discovers something sinister in his apartment. Spying on his neighbors both in an auditive as well as visual way doesn't make friends, so he suspects one of his neighbors is after him. If that's not enough, he's badgered by the landlord and his strangely aggressive father. After sending his slightly retarded friend to investigate, yes, retarded since the actor breaks the rule so majestically set in the movie Tropic Thunder by going full retard, that friend discovers a horrific murder, and that of course makes things even more complicated. Kindred is pretty much a Ward Kid Rear Window with a murder mystery, but it leaves a little to be desired on the script side. The film is a little bit disjointed and juggling too much in the air despite the few characters that are in it. It offers enough to keep you invested through its run, but the ending was fairly underwhelming whether you saw it coming or not. Kindred has a good idea, but the characters' insanity and agoraphobia should have been pronounced a little bit more. There's simply not enough mystery and darkness in this movie. Check that. So Bonnie and April fixed whatever was wrong with me, or at least I think, cause I'm not seeing anything different. I sure hope they weren't lying to me and did unseemly things with me without me being there to experience it, but still. Anyways, on to the movies.